Hello everybody, and thanks for joining us. My name is Michelle Jacques, and I'm a member of the AAMC's Career Support Committee, and I'll be serving as the moderator for today's webinar, which is entitled Development 101. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself to begin. I'm currently the Chief Curator at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, which is on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. This is a position I've held since 2012, and before that I worked at the Art Gallery of Ontario for the better part of 18 years, where in the curatorial department I started as a research assistant and curatorial assistant, and when I left in late 2012 I was the acting curator of Canadian art. I wanted to introduce you to our two speakers that you see on your screen. We're very lucky to have two esteemed development specialists with us today. John Easley is someone whose passion for culture has brought him to the museum world, the art museum world, and to the symphony orchestra world. Currently, he's the VP and Chief Philanthropy Officer with the St. Louis Symphony. His previous positions have included President of the Museum of New Mexico Foundation, Director of Development and External Affairs at the St. Louis Art Museum, Director of External Affairs at the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City, and Director of External Affairs at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And going way back to the outset of his career, he was the Director of Development for the Dallas Symphony Orchestra. Jane Hilton is currently the Senior Manager of Major Gifts and Philanthropy at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto, Canada. This is one of the largest art museums in North America, and she joined the development team more than 10 years ago as the Coordinator of Special Events. Within 4 months, she was promoted to the Manager of Special Events, and shortly after that to Manager of Major Gifts, a position that she held for about 6 years before moving into her current role. Jane has also worked in special events at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery, also in Toronto, and she was a valued colleague of mine at the AGO for more than 7 years, and she's somebody that I credit with teaching me what I do know about development in cultural institutions. Here in Victoria, at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, the museum staff numbers about 25 employees. So I work closely with my colleagues in development on our full range of fundraising activities. That includes member and donor events, sponsorship, special events, grant writing, and we're just in the earliest stages of a capital campaign for a major renovation project to our building. At the Art Gallery of Ontario, where I used to work, which is a much larger institution with around 500 employees, the range of development activities was much broader than here, but at the same time, because of the size of the institution and staff, while I worked with development colleagues throughout my career, the activities that I participated in were quite defined compared to my current experience. In this webinar, our speakers will introduce us to the important role that they play as development specialists in the cultural institution setting. We're going to approach the subject from the perspective of how development and curatorial interests and activities are linked, and examine the ways in which individuals in the two areas work together effectively to support the vision and goals of their institutions. We recognize that the people participating in today's webinar come from a range of institutions and are at different stages in their careers. But while there may be very specific expectations of you in terms of how you work with development wherever you are now, and you should certainly feel free to ask questions that are specific to your day-to-day work lives in the moment, we recognize that your careers will evolve and you'll find yourselves in new situations in the future. So we're going to try to address as broad a range of development issues and activities as possible in this short conversation. So I've only given you a little hint of what John and Jane are all about, but I'm going to ask them each to talk about their own career histories and experiences with an emphasis on how their activities have intersected with those of their curatorial colleagues. Jane, let's start with you. You and I worked together at the AGO for many years on several projects that involved a really close collaboration and saw a really meaningful merging of development and curatorial mandates. I'm wondering if you can tell us what your current role entails, talk a little bit about your previous roles, and how you see your role intersecting with those of your curatorial colleagues.
Sure. Well, I started off at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery, as you noted, which is an organization of much smaller scale than the AGO. And I was working in special events, and so that was my very first entree, and I should say that I came from a background of a BFA in fine arts. So I was somebody who didn't, have a plan to get into fundraising, and I have that in common with most of those who work on the individual giving team, that we come from an art background, a passion for and interest in art, and here we are as fundraisers. So we kind of come to it with a love for art, and that's, I guess, what we share and have in common with our donors and our curators, who are our colleagues, and so that's sort of the motivation, I guess, behind my work. So working in special events was a great way to start off my development career, because of course it deals with individuals, there's the corporate piece, there's kind of a little bit of everything within it. And at a place like the Power Plant, small, kind of, used to presenting hip and edgy work, pushing boundaries and pushing buttons, we had a lot of breadth to move and program for the fundraising events. And so that was my first real opportunity to work with curators. So curators were programming. It was also very much at the sway and interest of those involved in the committee. So the director would be involved in helping us build that committee of people. They'd inevitably have artists involved, and so they'd be helping us think through really creative, sometimes completely out there ideas for the events. So that was my first real role, and then I came here to the AGO working in special events, and we weren't as nimble an organization. There were certainly more hoops and more checks and balances, a bigger public, a broader audience, a lot more stakeholders, more considerations to be mindful of, and also with that greater access to a number of different resources by all senses and definitions of that word. So that was my starting point here, which again was kind of a good way to get connected to a number of different elements and aspects to the development work. And then since then I've had a few different roles. So I've worked with curators on programming for an under 40 program. We call it AGO Next, that we launched, and so Michelle was certainly involved in helping us think that through. So that was a young professionals program, or it is a young professionals program that is really about getting the next generation of supporters in the queue to help help us achieve all of the AGO's ambitions. So that was a part of my role for a number of years. We had a major capital campaign with the Frank Gehry expansion and renovation project, so I worked on the capital campaign to that, and now working with our donor groups and with our major gift donors, so really working with individuals to help make our exhibitions and programs possible. So with curators now, the way I'm working, some of that becomes a moment where we're thinking through what studios will we visit if we're on a moment of donor travel that we might be going to. What artists would be great to hear from, or what creative thinker do we want to program for any given event? Who might be a fantastic person to interview Thomas Roof when he's here for an upcoming exhibition? So we think through the programming piece for sure in terms of what we deliver for those people who are our supporters, and we also think through the relationship piece. So our curators are absolutely one of our best assets in terms of mapping who's interested in what in the city, who's collecting what, who did they meet at what event or what opening that they think might be a good person for us to start to cultivate and bring into the fold. So Curatorial really is very much intersected in the work of major gift fundraising with individuals.
Thank you, Jane. A lot of great ideas came up in that introduction, and we'll touch on some of the things that you've raised a little later in more detail. I just wanted to ask a quick question before we move on. How big is the development team at the AGO? How many people in that department?
I think we're around 23 now, 23 to 25 people. Yeah, so it's grown, and it's ebbed and flowed over the years somewhat, and we've gone through different structures inevitably, and we're becoming much more of a fundraising shop, as it's kind of called in the industry, so that there's sort of professional streams of people who do different, particular focused work rather than kind of the generalist. We've up until recent years, we've really, as major gift officers, done everything. So by that I mean everything from organizing any of the event details that need to happen to actually making the asks, stewarding a gift, making sure the recognition is proper on all of the websites and materials and introduction panels and all of that kind of thing. And now some of that is starting to be kind of streamlined a bit with different people fitting into the different puzzle pieces in to make the whole.
Great. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Now let's move on to John. John, I'm going to ask you to address your experience as a development professional, particularly as it relates to art museums, focusing on how you've worked closely with curatorial colleagues, because it was very interesting when we were coming up with the names of participants for this panel. My colleagues on the Career Support Committee, your name was put forward by several people. You're somebody with a reputation in the field for working well with curators.
Well, it's been one of the most enjoyable parts of the work. Honestly, I've been privileged to work for some great institutions. I began my career, as you mentioned, in the performing arts on the Symphony side, and then spent 25 years working for major art museums. Happily, 3: Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Nelson Atkins in Kansas City, and St. Louis Art Museum. My role in all of those institutions, and they're interestingly similar institutions in that they're all large encyclopedic collections. They're all in Midwestern cities, and they're all about the same budget size. So a budget size of today roughly $25 to $30 million annual operating budget. Our development operations were similar, at least by the time I got involved they became similar. We took a very much a collaborative approach to development, and that is to say that our role in the philanthropy and financial development is really fundamentally exists to support the mission of the institution, and it exists to support the collections and the artistic direction and vision and program of an institution. And so we organize development in all of these 3 museums around this idea that we were a unified team that were engaging a community. So in my role in Minneapolis, for example, I was responsible for external affairs and development, everything from front of house to events to the membership, the marketing, the communications and media relations, as well as financial development. And all those things fit together to really essentially build relationships with the community and the public. And I've always felt that relationship building, if done in a holistic way, would follow sort of an audience conversion chain that leads from involvement, maybe awareness to involvement, to real engagement, to deeper engagement, and eventually to investment at whatever level. In terms of development work, we've been involved in everything from raising funds for general operations, and these were all museums and are all museums that depend on ongoing community support to simply meet the operating budget. They're not supported entirely by public funding or tax dollars. They're dependent on people writing checks annually to keep the operation going, but also dependent on fundraising through membership, fundraising through events, fundraising through initiatives to develop support, dedicated support for exhibitions, for collections development. These are all institutions that in some cases have large endowments, but those endowments don't begin to meet all of the needs and desires for collection and acquisitions development. And then also capital campaigns and endowment campaigns, and we were privileged to work on major capital campaigns in all three of those institutions, either to build wings or to build new buildings, and that, of course, is a galvanizing moment, an exciting moment for a major institution, for any institution. But I think that that you really can't be successful in a development program without a real thoughtful, collaborative structure working with the curatorial teams, and we were privileged to have in all of these experiences that I've had just great colleagues, and ultimately with the situation where you have an encyclopedic collection, you have natural constituencies that fall into line behind different collections and curators and the vision that the curator has for a particular department or collection, and in that way, we really became partners with the curators. I think development has evolved so much, and support systems for institutions has developed so much over the years that I've been doing this work. Certainly, the corporate sector has become less and less a factor. The government-based funding has become less and less a factor. The great ascendancy in terms of success for institutions has been developing really deep relationships with major individual donors, whether they're board members or whether they're individuals who have both the capacity and the inclination to make a real difference. And I think when we think about development and being successful in museums, we have to continue to think about the fact that we've got to focus our effort and our time on building the right relationships with the right friends, and invest the precious resources that we have. We only have X number of curators, X number of development professionals, but if we can align ourselves together and be highly strategic about how we spend our time and how we focus our efforts so that we are engaging people who have both that capacity to make a difference with major gifts that we need to do our work, as well as the inclination, the likelihood that they either have a natural affinity or they might develop one as they get to know your institution and your curators. And that's one of the great joys of working with curators, is often they are really gifted at developing those affinities and getting folks really engaged and excited and involved. And one thing I was going to mention today, and then I'll wrap up my preamble here, but I think that one of the great trustees that I had the privilege of working with in my career was Bruce Dayton, and Bruce was a trustee of the Minneapolis Institute of Arts for about 70 years. Sadly passed away just recently, but one of the great collectors and donors, and he used to say to us that he thought the curator's job description was to collect collectors. And I always love that, because I think the relationships that you develop with people who are passionate about their collection, and ultimately perhaps with sharing it with your institution in a bequest or a long-term loan or in whatever way, that collecting collectors was a pretty good thing to keep in mind as we think about the work that we do with donors.
Great. Thanks, John. That's a really great segue into the next question that I want to ask. You both speak so much about relationships and the importance of relationship building, and John, you even went so far as to use the phrase engaging communities. And I think that that's a really important shift in a curator's understanding of what development is, what our development colleagues do, because asking for money can be daunting, but as you say, building relationships is something that we do naturally as part of the job. So I wonder if we could take a little time just to expand on this particular part of the conversation and address how development and curatorial can best work together to transform personal relationships into support for the museum. Do either of you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it is the notion of people give to people. So, you know, it is, and there are organizations out there that are, you know, social services, for example, that have a very cause-driven mission that is hard to miss. For the arts, it can be more nuanced than that, and I think that's one of our you know, things that we need to get better at. Certainly here at the AGO, but I would say kind of as a group. You know, the arts need to get better at articulating why we matter, what is our contribution, and I think that, you know, when we can do that, it helps us. It becomes a platform for relationship building. But the notion that people give to people, it's, you know, it's about trust, it's about reciprocity. It is a relationship. It's two-way. So it's understanding the motivations to give. What is it exactly that somebody is interested in, and what do they want to get out of this relationship with us, the gallery, the curator, the artist, all of the different sort of dimensions that can you know, be facilitated in a way. I often feel like my job as in a development role is really kind of facilitating those relationships. So finding the match between the need and the interest on the donor side, and being the kind of bridge to help them, to help facilitate that relationship for them, have it be meaningful for them, both for them personally and for the impact that they're making through their gift. So I think that has something to do with the relationship piece.
Great. John, do you have?
I think that's just a great point. I think Jane's got it right on. I think that it really is people to people, and people do give to people. And certainly if you can build a relationship that's built on trust and on really building a family of constituents who over time really care for the institution, and certainly it's been my experience that you know, there are many donors here at the Symphony. There are many donors at the museum I've worked with who've been giving for years and years and years. So I always start by thinking about relationships in terms of, well, what does that relationship look like, and that you're really continuing this long association that people have, and they feel really deeply about with an institution. So how do you engage them in ways that strengthen and deepen that relationship, and how do you meet them in terms of what their needs are and what their interests are? It really is an exchange of value, but at the end of the day, we're all in the same we're all in the same boat, rowing hopefully in the same direction with the same mission. And I think that this is where messaging is really important in brand management for institutions. And when we have a team of folks in a large institution with lots of folks involved, it's important to be really intentional and really clear about, well, what do we stand for, and what is our case, and you know, what is the case for art? What's the case for a great public art museum in a great community? What's the case for arts education? What difference do we make? Because we are out there in this landscape of competing with, in many cases, higher education, major universities, healthcare. The needs are immense, but there are folks who really will do more and give more if they really understand and feel part of something bigger than themselves.
Yeah. It was actually at a AAMC conference a few years ago at a session on development that one of the speakers pointed out that as curators, we didn't ever have to say, you know, can I have some of your money? We had to say, this is what we can do together. You know, I might bring this piece, you might be bringing a financial piece, but it's all about working towards that place where everybody understands what we can achieve together. So thanks for fleshing out that. I always remembered that as a kind of pithy line, but you just really fleshed out what that means for me. Now, Jane, you mentioned your move from the much smaller power plant to the Art Gallery of Ontario and talked about what it meant to move to a place that was less flexible. And John, the institutions that you've worked at sound like they're quite large. Those are healthy budgets by Canadian standards, a museum with a budget in the 20 millions. So I wonder if you could now talk a little bit about how a cultural institution can build processes in order to address what might seem at times to be competing ambitions of curatorial and development departments. Jane, you had specifically mentioned that this is something that's actively happening at the AGO, so I don't know if you want to start.
Yeah, I'm excited about processes right now at the AGO. Having been here for 11 years and seen, different leadership, different changes. Right now we're in a really good moment of actually putting some rigor around processes and defining what our working relationships are in a new way. So we've always had the way we work together, but now I think we're starting to have a framework for the way we work together. So by that I mean we're starting to do things like what we call our exhibition source documents. So those are documents that become the sort of beginning point of what we would use to make any kind of development proposal where we would be going out seeking support, whether it be corporate or for individual foundations, government, etc. And what we're doing now is actually providing a framework that development really needs certain things answered within those profiles, we're calling them, an exhibition profile. And so the questions include, why this, why now? What is the impact? What will the legacy be of this project? Why will this matter to the Toronto community, to the art community, to the community outside of, beyond Toronto and outside of Canada, even the international community? We're asking those questions, which are the kinds of questions that donors want answers from us and that we need to, as an organization, collaboratively come together to answer for ourselves. So those questions are becoming part of how we're thinking as decisions are being made about whether an exhibition actually meets the criteria to be approved and move forward. Once it has been approved, the idea is that they're baked into the language that we use, how we talk about the exhibition, how we build our case for support, essentially. So that's one shift. That's a very real live example of how we're starting to work. And there are, I should just share that that is a culture shift here. So we've had, some sense as we've gone through, we've called them why this, why now meetings. So we've got the documents, but then there's also, something that you can't kind of just convey in paper or in a document, but that you actually want to get at the nuance of in conversation with your colleagues. And we've had some conversations where it does feel as though curators have felt as though they're being challenged, as though they need to prove or defend why this is an important exhibition, which is not actually at all what we're trying to do. I think we're, absolutely with our colleagues in terms of that, but that's just a culture shift, as I say, that is kind of part of the experience right now as we're making these transitions into new ways of working. We're being really clear at kind of trying to get more transparent with one another about our prospecting and our relationships. So by that I mean, of course, curatorial in any kind of collecting institution has a real agenda and mandate around acquisitions, both funding and works of art donations. And on the development side, in our case here at the AGO, we actually don't have an acquisitions endowment. We're not doing acquisitions fundraising, as in our team isn't charged with fundraising for acquisitions. So you can have a bit of an inherent conflict there when it comes to, who are you, who do you, in terms of the pool of supporters and the pool of collectors out there, what does the AGO need and want from any one individual, and what's the sequence of the ask in a way? You know, thinking of somebody who has a stellar collection who the AGO is absolutely interested in cultivating for that to become a donation here for our permanent collection. But then we've also got an ambition that they would support us for the operating budget for our exhibitions and programs. So we're starting to kind of acknowledge that very directly, I guess, and to put on the table what kind of activity is going on with what individuals. And we're mapping that out together and then putting together strategies. So I referenced Thomas Roof earlier, and that's because, you know, it's another example of top of mind right now. We've got roof exhibition opening in April, and so, you know, one of the things that we spent time today doing was curatorial and development sitting down in a room together to map through all our different stakeholders, who will have interest, who we need to steward, who we need to cultivate, all of the different activity that we need to kind of use that moment with an artist with real cachet to, you know, to the best for the best interests of the organization writ large. So, so those are some of the kind of things that you need to negotiate and wrestle with sometimes, and ultimately, if you've got a framework that is about working together and the big picture so that you can figure that out together, I think we'll set ourselves up for increased success that way.
Great, thank you. John, did you have some comments on this question?
Well, I was just listening to Jane with great interest because I think she's describing and articulating a really great model and a great vision for bringing all of this together. Ultimately, I think the success in philanthropy and in developing major support for institutions is a function of leadership and ideas. And if the institution is fortunate to have a strong director with a real vision that's articulated in a plan or in a planning process, that becomes a really helpful tool both in terms of planning asks, but planning the strategy around, well, what money do we need? How much do we need to fulfill our vision and our mission? When do we need that money? What part of it is operating and programmatic? What part of it is endowment? What part of it might be building expansion? What part of it might be acquisitions? What part of it might be a long-term endowment to begin to perpetuate some of the ideas that we have? And so having a strategic plan for this that allows the development team to come in and really sort of map out, well, if we needed to raise X, what's the most effective and efficient way to do it, and how can we mobilize the team so that we're using everybody to best and highest use? Because there's certain relationships that are embedded in the institution, in particular departments, where you would never think of going to a particular donor without having that person by your side. Concurrently, you'll probably fall short if you only take one person, because there may be a larger vision. I can think of gifts that we've developed from donors that involved not just the gift of a collection, but the gift of endowment to support programs and exhibitions, the gift of a gallery to house the collection, the gift of programmatic funding for marketing and brochures, and a curatorial assistant, and a person in the research area. So what is the total package look like in terms of what the vision for a particular project is? And I think when you can go holistically and then do those projects in the context of a larger plan, you know, there are only so many staff on development, there are only so many curators, there are only so many hours in the day. So often the question is, how do you organize and mobilize so that you're spending the right time with the right people on the right purpose in the right sequence? And sometimes these sequences play out over, as Jane knows, as you all know, over months and years. But if you have a long-term game and a sort of a 5 to 10 year plan, you can be very intentional and very focused in the way that you build momentum for your fundraising. And we all know momentum is a powerful thing. Particularly if you're in a campaign and you raise the first 50% of the goal in the first year, it creates this great excitement around what is possible. So I think this strategic, intentional approach with a degree of process and a real strong degree of intentionality attached to it is what will make you more successful in this work.
Fantastic. Who would have thought that a question about fundraising process would have led to such a fascinating discussion?
We fundraisers love our process.
I just wanted to flag for the participants that we're going to continue with a series of questions, one about member and donor cultivation events, one about sponsorship, and one about capital campaigns or other major fundraising campaigns. Feel free to ask questions about those topics or any other topics at any point. I'm collecting questions in the control panel here and can intersect them into our conversation or save them for the end. And yeah, this is your time. So hopefully you're finding what we're talking about useful, but please feel free to contribute questions at any point. I think we've lost Jane for the moment, so I'm not sure if she can still hear us, and I don't want to forge too far ahead without her. Start with an anecdote, which is...
How about an easy question?
Pardon?
How about an easy question, maybe?
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is this is the stage in the conversation where we were going to start talking about donor cultivation events, and I wanted to just preface that by saying that this was really my point of entry into participating in development activities as a young curator. You know, I think the very first thing I did was probably give tours, exhibition tours at members' events, and then that graduated to giving presentations at events for donor groups. And as Jane mentioned, we worked together on the Young Associates group for a while, and a lot of fundraising events. So the cultivation event, the special event, is a part of the field that is near and dear to my heart. I don't know if all curators get as excited as I do about participating in donor cultivation events. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about why it's important for curators to participate in these kinds of activities. And maybe a second part of the question is, have you had experiences with curators who are particularly good at knowing how to insert themselves into these kinds of events, and became people who really helped you with your work because they were just so sort of clued into what their role was in these situations? And John, are you going to go first?
I'll jump in, and I'll just say I think events are fundamental to what we do, and certainly this is the great joy of working in museums, is being in the gallery or being in the conservation lab or wherever we are, and learning together about these great collections and these great objects. And so I think that certainly when you can engage and connect people in ways that are meaningful, and when a curator can bring that object to life through a story or a conversation, this is what really gets people feeling great about institutions and feeling really connected. So I think events are something that are done in different ways on different levels. I've found in my work that almost always when you do donor surveys and you ask people what would you want in a donor event, invariably they want to learn about the art. That's a much more common response I found than I want to have a glitzy party and dress up, and I'm not opposed to dressing up and having glitzy parties, and we need to do that. But at the end of the day, people who are really feeling connected want to learn about the art, and that's something that the curators do and do quite effectively. And we can't do that as development officers. We can try to facilitate it, and we can have the same joy that the patrons do in the learning, but at the end of the day, it's bringing value and it's bringing context to a person's understanding and learning, and that kind of engagement often leads to investment.
I'm so sorry. I've got this tickle all of a sudden, and I have to apologize. I'm going to do my best here, but I've got a lozenge in my throat. Yeah, I think events are us. We always kind of joke. But I think there are moments when even a curator might actually be our gift officer in the sense of cultivating. So I can think of last night we had an artist here in the city visiting, and it was a moment where we had a collector host a small group of donors, prospective donors, in their home. And that actually felt like it wasn't the right time to have development there at the table. Development there at the table implies an ask that's coming. And while I extended the invitations, and they were to donors who we have relationships with, the fact that the invitation was coming from me was a signal on one sense, but on the other, to bring together patrons, curators, and the artist is a really, you can create a special opportunity to your donors or prospective donors that isn't always necessarily a moment where development has a presence. And when I say then that your curators are your gift officers, it means that, today we had our debrief session. What did you learn? What should I know? What was interesting? Who connected with who? And all of those kinds of sort of intel sharing that you can do with your colleagues in Curatorial. In addition to the absolute importance of shared experiences at events themselves, there are those sort of rare special opportunities that actually are a sort of development constructed moment, and again where you're working with Curatorial to figure out what collectors need to be there, not because we're going to necessarily ask them for a gift, a donation, but because we need to develop a relationship with them for other reasons. Yeah, I would add that.
Yeah, and I would just chime in and just add one other thing, and that is I think there's so much value in this information sharing, and so what you learn through conversations, however casual, you may learn that a donor's daughter just got into Princeton. You may learn that they just sold their business. You may learn all kinds of things that are pertinent and relevant to your relationship with them. And if a curator can report that back in a quick call report or an email, and that gets in the notes. Conversely, if a development officer has lunch with that donor and learns something that really the curator, who's a lead curator on that relationship, should know, it should be shared. So I've encountered institutions where information is closely guarded, and I think it's a mistake. I think we need to share our information and help one another be better at relationships.
Yeah,
together.
And Michelle, absolutely, I agree. And we started something at the AGO, again, going back to process, where it's called Note to File, and it's just an email that the address is notetofile@ago.net. And the idea is that anytime a curator is out, because of course we know curators are out and about and connecting with donors, not just through things that are about our organization, but all through the city for different art moments, in people's private homes, all of that kind of thing. And so the idea is that we need to information share, and that any of that kind of intel in terms of what somebody's collecting, what they may be involved in terms of another organization, all of those kinds of things really help inform our picture of that donor's interests and ultimately their motivations. So yeah, those are some of the tools that we use as well. And I think when you asked the question, you framed it, Michelle, as a curator who stands out as somebody who's really good at helping with that relationship building. I think a curator who knows that that information is worth sharing and does share it, is absolutely a great partner for us. And like you say, John, vice versa. We can be great partners in sharing information that we learn about a donor as well.
Fantastic. I'm mindful of the time. It's amazing how quickly it flies when the conversation is so interesting. I'm actually going to move on to a question about sponsorship now. I'm skipping over a question about special events, but in a way I feel like that's something that we've really touched on quite a bit in the previous conversation. So now this sort of came up in a comment that John made, so I'm just going to launch into the question at the point of this issue of corporate or individual sponsorship for exhibitions. And at the start of my career, I think corporations were often the supporters of major exhibitions at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and we've seen a shift in that. Can you talk about a little bit more about that? Not sure if you want to start, John, since you.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in and get it started. I think that corporate support for museums and for the arts generally has been declining for as many years as I've been in this work, and that's almost 40. So it's been a kind of a gradual decline. I don't want anyone to get confused and say there's no corporate money to be had. There is, but it's become a very different game, and I think the corporate support that we enjoy today is largely driven by relationships with board members. Honestly, the days of the Philip Morrises and the major oil companies launching big national programs to support major exhibition tours, those are getting to be very few and far between. I think that what we have seen, though, is a real increase in ramping up in individual sponsorship of exhibitions, and that can be true of a major exhibition in your museum, but it can also be true for maybe a smaller exhibition in a particular curatorial area that has a natural constituency. So what I've observed is more and more individuals are excited to support a particular department in their ability to bring a particular exhibition to program to fruition, and that I've seen a shift of more and more individual support and sponsorship of exhibitions as opposed to corporate. Jane, you probably have some good insights on this as well.
For sure, as you know, somebody sitting on the individual giving side, then you also feel the pressure for increased, budgets growing year over year for what that means to kind of offset what we're not seeing on the corporate side of things.
And I have also observed that as we've seen a decline in corporate giving generally, there have been trustees that I've been able to talk to in museums recently. We did this in St. Louis, where we basically painted a vision of how funding for exhibitions had changed over 10 or 15 years, and made the case that really our ability to continue to be really active in organizing and touring exhibitions was going to depend on private support, and so we created some endowed funds that are now permanent endowed funds that simply flow a stream of income that can be supported or can be used to support exhibition development. And so I think you can flip the coin over and try and pitch that, and I've seen that become an effective way of engaging individuals who understand it. At the end of the day, where organizing exhibitions is important and worth perpetuating, whatever the winds of time may bring.
Well, that's a clear indication, I guess, of why the development of these relationships with donors are so important, and it's so important for curators to be participating in fostering those relationships, because as the museum world changes, the places where we're trying to engage these folks are increasing. And I wonder if we could move on to a quick question about capital campaigns and how they relate to the sort of fundraising for the everyday activities of the institution. Is a major capital campaign a fundamentally different kind of fundraising from what you do day to day, or is it just getting even closer to those people that we've been developing relationships with over the years?
I think it is. The spirit of it, and maybe that's kind of a funny way to say it, but that word is what jumps to mind. The spirit of it is different. So right now we don't have a capital campaign on, but we have a small inventory of some named space opportunities, so for gallery spaces to be named. And so, we were having a conversation the other day, and we were thinking through who belongs on our prospect list for those named spaces. And of course, you're mapping that out in relation to the work you need to do with some of those same people on the supporting our annual operations. And you have a different conversation. So you know, those who will support a named space may not support the operating, or may not have the right desire at the, like it's a different kind of, you turn a different key with it at times. Though I will say those who supported our renovation in 2008 when we reopened with the Frank Gehry transformation are, by and large, that group is very much engaged today. There are some who it was a moment in time, it was a special proposition, there was excitement and buzz, and it was the perpetuity piece was, of course, something different that was, different from the nature of an annual operating moment. But by and large, that campaign was done through those who we brought close to us and continue to be close with us in a long-term relationship.
Yeah, I think that capital campaigns are increasingly a way of life for institutions. I think that there was a period, particularly the 1990s, where it seemed every museum was building a wing or building a new building, and so capital campaigns were quite common. I have always felt that it's important to have a capital campaign operate alongside your ongoing fundraising, so that you're not replacing what you're doing ordinarily, and so that if you have a really strong base of support for ongoing support, you want to continue to perpetuate that. Capital campaigns, by their nature, really generally require very large gifts, and so in the case of those campaigns that I've done, they've largely been successful because we had very effective and very committed boards of trustees, and so in St. Louis here for the Art Museum, we developed a campaign which was capital and endowment, and the thinking was that we needed to build a significant wing, and we ended up building a 125,000 square foot expansion to the building. But the trustees were very clear that they wanted to build that, but also to endow its operation, and so we put together a $160 million campaign to do that. 75% of those dollars were given by members of the board, and the lead gifts were 6 gifts of $10 million to get it started. So you're really dealing with a relatively small sector of your constituency, but when people step up and do those wonderful things for an institution, it gets everybody else excited, and so annual giving and membership and everything else is enhanced. Collections development is enhanced. We have more galleries, therefore more opportunities to display great new objects. So again, it's back to that strategic plan. But I think capital campaigns for major universities and colleges, they're virtually perpetual campaigns. You get Washington University here in St. Louis is wrapping up a $2.5 billion campaign, but they're also planning the next one, and they're going to just basically segue from one campaign to another. So I think they're there are individuals in all of our communities that can give very substantial gifts, but we have to have the right engagement with them, and that's where building the board and building the relationships is key.
Great, thank you. We are almost at time, so I should move on to the conclusion very soon, but given the situations of a number of our webinar participants today, I wanted to ask one last quick question, which is about maybe the specifics, or the particularities of working in a museum that is embedded in a larger institution. So I'm particularly thinking of the University Museum. But Jane, you worked at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery, which is embedded in the Harborfront Center. And what are your experiences of these situations where an institution, a smaller institution, might have to figure out how to navigate a development department that is part of the larger sort of umbrella institution? Any insights into that?
Do you want to go for it, John?
Yeah, go ahead, and I'll chime in.
Well, I think you know, it's a little bit like what I was talking about with curatorial and development, with sort of our own ambitions and needs, and how it's all part of the whole at the end of the day. But we do come to it with our own sort of agendas or targets. I think that, you know, something in my experience with the power plant, under the umbrella of Harborfront Center, it was always kind of weighing out the big picture together, ensuring that we were, you know, having transparency in terms of our conversations about who was talking to whom, and of course navigating any kind of exclusive relationships, whether it be a bank, a financial institution, and you know what that meant in terms of what we could or couldn't do for the power plant on any given project. So I think it's about kind of understanding each other's agendas, figuring out the territory that you have to move within and operate within, and then, you know, communication.
Yeah, and I have not worked for a university museum, but I have certainly been acquainted with colleagues who have, and I think the thing that often can be challenging is, you know, is your museum formally connected to, for example, a university-wide campaign, and where do you rank in the sort of rank order of that campaign, and is your museum a priority for the central development office at the university? The good news there is often these universities have very sophisticated, large staff, a lot of resources, and they can really help you if you are partnering with them in the right ways. That only works if the president and the director of the museum are in accord on the fact that the museum is a real priority in a university campaign, and will be you'll get an opportunity to engage with people who sometimes alumni maybe have a split allegiance between the art museum and, say, the School of Law. So who's going to get the best gift? That's the question. I think those are the challenges, but I think there's also a lot of opportunity, and I'm aware of situations where those kinds of relationships, and again, there you're dealing with relationships within a very large institution to sort of get the best possible result.
Great, thank you. So we are 1 minute before time, so I'm afraid we're going to have to conclude this webinar, Development 101, here. John and Jane, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today, and for your enthusiasm in helping to develop the conversation in the past weeks and months. Thank you to Judith and Meredith in the AAMC office for their technical support. On my end, it was virtually flawless today. So thank you so much, because I'm not usually that good with technology. And thank you as well to everyone on the Career Support Committee for helping to put this together. For the participants, the AAMC mentees, thank you for joining us today. And I know that you're all working with wonderful, engaged mentors, so if you have questions that relate to this topic moving forward, I know that they'll help guide you to answers. Clearly, the development curatorial conversation is a fruitful one, and I hope that some of the ideas that we've raised today will inspire future discussions and collaborations in all of our institutions. So thank you again to everyone, and I was going to say happy spring, but then I realized it's only spring here.
Not quite. We will remain hopeful, however. Thank you, Michelle. We appreciate your wonderful job of putting this together, and thank you, Jane. It's a privilege to be with all of you. And to all of our mentees, may the force be with you.
Yes. You're our currency. We need you.
Absolutely.